I did early season recoveries. It is a ton harder. Every doggone state that you talk to, including my own state here in Ohio, said, nope, not legal, can't do it. So here's my thing, if you're watching. So the four-wheeler flipped over and they had to hike back out of there. How's it going, folks? I'm Mike with Drone Deer Recovery. Today, we're going to do a little bit something different for you guys on the channel. If this is your first time here, make sure to hit the subscribe button. That helps the algorithm. If you guys find this interesting, make sure to share it with your buddies. I'd appreciate that. We're doing an interview here today for an article that will be written for, is it Realtree.com?
That's correct.
Yep. So, pretty excited. We're gonna see what we get into here and just follow along.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Super honored to be able to talk to you guys because it's really something that's interesting. It's kind of fresh. It's new. A lot of the things that have to do with the deer hunting world has been beat to death.
Yep.
And the bat used to beat it to death is all splintered and and all over the place. But yeah, no, this is an interesting concept. It's something that a lot of people are finding really interesting. A lot of people still don't even know what it is.
Yeah.
And, even though they soon, probably will soon. So that's what we're doing today is kind of dig into this and talk about the nuts and bolts of what it is that you do, what it is, drone deer recovery is designed for and to what it accomplishes and everything that's involved with it.
Yeah, cool. Well, I feel honored that you reached out and want to do this. It means a lot. I'm very passionate about this new technology helping in the hunting community. So I hope I can shed some light on what it is that we do, where we plan on going, and what the future holds.
Awesome. So just jumping right into it, what does drone deer recovery do?
So we use thermal imaging drones to locate the body heat of a carcass. So if you hit a deer and you can't find it, let's say just a normal blood trail, you can't track it like that. If you call us with enough time, we will be able to come out, use the thermal imaging camera on the drone to find the heat, and then we have a zoom camera as well, 200 times zoom camera on that drone that at 400 feet, we're able to zoom down and see exactly if that's the deer that you hit or not. Of course, you as the hunter will have to identify the deer that we're looking at, and we'll have screens for you to look at as well to identify it.
You mentioned that time frame there. Generally, what is that time frame?
It's a lot dependent on the weather, but let's just say ideal temperatures. 30 Fahrenheit to 50 Fahrenheit. If it's in there, it's not unheard of to be 36 hours after death that you can have thermals on a deer.
And generally, what does that heat signature look like to you?
The heat signature colors that I'm using is a red tint, and I am seeing it show up as a red blob on the screen. But I've found my longest one was 30 hours and the conditions were great. It was overcast, didn't have to worry about any interference with thermals there. Plenty of thermals to see a deer that was dead for 30 hours.
Before we get too deep into that, actually, I'll back up. We'll get to that later. When it comes to the drone deer recovery resource that you're offering, how different is it? Obviously, it's very different, but how much more effective, I should say, is this method versus, say, using a dog?
I've never used a dog personally, but from all the clients that have now used drone deer recovery, over 100 of them, just for me personally, their opinion is this is a better option because you don't have to, bust out your other deer in the process. Am I finding more deer than the dog is? I would say there's probably a chance I am. And the reason I say that is if a dog is trailing a deer that isn't dead, that dog never gets credit for the location or whatever because the deer was never actually completely expired. So I would say that if you would look at the numbers, side by side, is it better? Like, are the recovery rates higher? I'd have to say that they're probably higher than dogs.
When should someone call you for your services? When should they not? When does it make sense?
I would say that if you start on a blood trail and you start thinking like, oh my gosh, I'm not liking how this is looking, it's petering out, the blood like normally that you can walk on. If you can't follow that trail after 150 yards, you should probably think about giving us a call. Sooner the better, right? Even dog guys are gonna tell you this, that if you bump the deer, the adrenaline that gets started back up in that deer, that sucker could go a long way. Although we can go a long way with our drones, it's just a lot harder if those deer start getting bumped.
When does it not make sense for someone to call you?
I don't know. You can call me anytime because the technology, just seeing it, is pretty wild. I just did one that I posted on the channel. It was 4 days after, and he felt like deer actually expired. If they're willing to give us a shot, I'll try it, because there's no knowing for sure, because I haven't done research, right? It wouldn't be right for me to go out and get a carcass that just freshly got killed or whatever and leave it there to do an experiment on it. Although we talked about it, if a deer gets hit in front of us on the road or something, we'd like to do that. So we went out there literally a week to 2 weeks later, because somebody just really wanted to know if there is a slight chance that there's thermals there. They want to see if we can find it.
What was the longest that you've recovered?
Somebody's hired me 2 weeks after. He just felt that this deer went out in the CRP field, and he just wanted to know if we can do it with our RGB cameras, red, green, blue. I didn't feel too confident in doing that, but he wanted to, at least have us try it. So we did that. We did not find his deer that he was hoping for. Honestly, if you want thermals on the deer, after 48 hours, probably not so much. But you don't know if that deer is dead for sure or not. And we'll be able to tell you, like if we find him, on his hoof elsewhere, you're gonna be like, oh gee, well the deer is alive. So, keep hunting him.
Sure. Obviously not always, but a lot of the time deer are dying in thick cover. They like that early successional cover where there's a lot of, head level cover, side cover. But, sometimes they die where there's a lot of canopy cover too. And so how does your technology, your drone technology, able to penetrate through, say, foliage that's really thick and nasty, and just, especially if it's the overhead, foliage? How is it able to penetrate that canopy and see that deer?
Yeah, so we're doing majority of this in Ohio, and our deer hunting season starts late September. So by mid-October, most of our leaves are drying up and falling off. I did early season recoveries. It is a ton harder. I'm just gonna put it out there. You have to take your time. So let's say a normal recovery takes me 20 minutes, right, without leaves. Now let's put the canopy on. It could take you an hour and 30 minutes, maybe even 2 hours, just to cover that same amount of area, because you have to go so much slower. You can pick up heat signatures through the canopy and little holes, but when you go to zoom, right, you have to be able to look through those little holes in order to identify if it's the carcass or the deer on the hoof for sure or not. Canopies are a pain in the neck for sure.
But it's still possible or useful tool.
Oh yeah.
When foliage is on.
Yeah, so I put a video out, it's been a while ago, but there's big oak trees, pin oak trees that still had their leaves on it. They were starting to dry out, but you can see the heat signatures through the leaves. It's a tight hole to look through. It can be done, it's just more of a pain in the neck.
Obviously, sounds like you're using really advanced and expensive equipment, so it's not going to be the typical drone that you go buy at Best Buy or Radio Shack, even though Radio Shack doesn't exist anymore. But I don't think it does anyway.
No, I don't know.
What is the difference between the technology and the equipment that you're using versus something that, some average Joe can just go buy off the street or at the store?
So the thermal that we're running, basically you can get it on a cheaper airframe, which is like a Mavic 3T. So the actual thermal camera is exactly the same as a cheap one. But where we really stand out is the zoom capabilities of our RGB camera on our bigger drones, because it's a 200 times zoom where you can be at 400 feet and still zoom down and identify for sure what deer it is. Where if you go with the smaller consumer grade drones, the zoom power on those cameras just is not good enough to zoom down through there to see if it's the deer for sure. Because if somebody's paying a service, right, if you're paying me to come and find your deer and I zoom in up on it and it's blurry and you're trying to really figure out if it's the deer or not because your image quality is so bad, you're probably not gonna be happy with that. And that's what I found when I started this. I was like, I'm gonna see if I can go the cheap route. And it just does not work as a paying service. Now for personal use, you might get away with it because you might come down some to get a better image, but we don't like doing that. We're not trying to put any stress or whatever on the deer at all when we're doing it. So we wanna stay up high and zoom down from there and take a look.
Yeah, it's very nice. So basically, you're able to find these deer without them really even technically knowing it.
Yeah, 98% of the deer don't know it, that we're there.
Yeah. So another question, when it comes to this, every state has its own laws. as far as where it's permitted, where it's not permitted, what you can do here, where you can do. So is drone deer recovery legal in all states, just some states? How does that work?
So when I speak on this subject, I'm not giving legal advice at all, but
Sure.
almost every state except some like Colorado and Oregon, I believe, are gray laws. It's like a gray, like they try to say, well, you can't use drones for hunting. We understand that. We don't use them for hunting. But then they try to say that in the process of taking the carcass that is now dead, that's part of the hunt. And it's so vague, right? It's so gray if it's actually part of hunting, because if you look at the definition of hunting, what is the definition of hunting? I'm not gonna get into it in this video, but you go back to the definition of hunting and what we're doing as a service. We have no interest in pursuing that whitetail or whatever it may be to take it. We're there to really just recover a carcass for the guy that put an arrow in him. So every state has their own opinion on if this is legal or not. And I'll tell you that every doggone state that you talk to, including my own state here in Ohio, said, nope, not legal, can't do it. I'm just telling you that I'm not going with their answer, because according to our attorneys and what we figured out, that this is not a form of hunting at all. We have no interest in it. So I think it's going to be just like the dogs. When dogs started out, it was illegal as well, right? Like, no, can't do it. They thought they're gonna be using it to probably track deer down. They shouldn't. But as states seen that people wanna use it for good, right? Like, there's still a lot of good people in this world. As they seen it being used for good, I think that they were like, you know what? I think it could be a good source for the community. And I see that going the same way with this technology. Yes, right off the rip, nope, illegal, can't do it, until they see the intent, right? The intent is to be good, to recover game that has been hit and not let it out there go to waste.
Yeah. So when it comes to, if somebody, wants to use your services, they'll contact you and you'll basically make the judgment call whether you can go out or not. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct.
Do you have any other, any kind of resources online as far as that goes, or anywhere that they can find that information on their own?
On the legal side of things?
Yeah.
If somebody's interested in doing this, if that is the question, they can go to our website and fill out the Become a Pilot form on there, and then go through the process. We do have research on different states that we can potentially give them that we've done. I haven't made that public just because it is gray.
So to that point, you said there's some states where it's really gray. Have you guys experienced any pushbacks from states and authorities?
Oh yeah, Michigan is a big pain in the neck. They're a liberal state. I'm just putting it out there. Michigan, if you're watching, we're coming, we're gonna be there, we'll see you there. They're going to take one word and try to fine us on the word take. So in the definition of hunting is pursue, take, and collect. And if we collect the carcass, they're going to say that was aid in the hunt. So here's my thing, if you're watching. So let's say I come out, right, and I fly my drone and I find the carcass and I leave it there, right? I leave it there, I don't take it. I'll just leave it there. Is that wrong too then? Because now you're wasting. I'm sorry, it's a little frustrating having some of these states that are just like so pushback because they don't understand the technology. They just don't. They think that everybody's gonna use it to go maybe find a big buck and go kill it, and they're not. People aren't gonna do that. There's enough good people in this world.
Obviously, the primary service that it seems like you're offering to the public is recovering a dead deer. What other services do you guys offer?
I just went public with this, is doing herd analysis or herd assessments. Basically coming out and flying your property, giving you a survey of what it looks like. And in that process, you're going to see coyotes, bobcats, deer, you name it, whatever's on your property, you're gonna see it, you're gonna count it. And we offer that to clients.
How does this technology stack up against, say, a trail camera survey?
So I've never done a trail camera survey myself, so I really don't know how good those things work. I've done farms, ranches now across the nation that have done trail cam surveys for years, and some were close to the number that they thought, according to the trail cam survey, and then others were way off. Usually it's they have more animals than they think they have.
Obviously, the big question is what does this cost? Recovering a dead deer side as well as the land management side where you're doing these surveys. What does it cost to the consumer, to the customer?
So drone deer recovery, to come out and locate a carcass, we're $450 to look and another $100 if we find the deer dead or alive. It gives us an incentive to try to find that deer with whatever we've got to work with. It just gives us an extra I really don't want to quit. So yeah, it's $450 to come look, another $100 if we find the deer dead or alive. With that fee includes 60 round trip miles from our home base. Over that is $1 a mile.
I guess the next question would be, how many different pilots do you have? Are you located and you travel from your home base there? Or do you have, pilots kind of sprinkled out all over the place?
Yep. We're working on getting pilots in multiple different states right now. We have between 15 and 20 different operators, 10 different states right now. As we get these dialed in, because we still got to go through a training program, we're going to be putting them on our website. That way people can go over there and check out exactly where we have operators. But as far as me here in Ohio, I do travel a long way because I want to be able to cover most of the state. I'll have more pilots operating from my home office here. Yeah, so if somebody is a long way from us or any of our operators, we're willing to drive. It could get a little pricey.
What's the wildest story that you've got when it comes to recovering a deer with drones? Just a really interesting encounter that you've had.
The one I always go to, the one that means the most to me, is not the biggest buck that I've found, but the coolest story was there's this old hunter. He's owned this farm for years. I think it was like 3 generations. And he's an old farmer. He goes out to try to get a deer and he puts an arrow in one. And he gets his son out and his wife, and they're tracking this deer in the rain. It gets dark. They ended up not being able to find him. And their son was like, okay, let's go home and then we'll come back in the morning and we can try to pick up on the trail again. Well, Grandma and Grandpa went home and son went to his house. In the meantime, Grandma and Grandpa were like, no, we gotta go find this deer. So they got on their 4-wheeler and they went back in this woods. It's dark. They're shining lights up on the hill to try to find him. And doing so, they slipped off the side of a bank down into a river. They rolled the 4-wheeler, landed on top of him under the water. Yeah, he's like, I have no idea how I got out of here. But so the 4-wheeler flipped over and they had to hike back out of there. He ended up in the hospital at 2 a.m., broken collarbone. And so then the next morning, his son is like, I have to do everything I can to get this buck because he's going through a lot. So he gets a dog out. By this time, it's rained a lot already and things have been pretty wet. The dog tried tracking the deer, couldn't find him. I don't know, he may have been a young dog or whatever, but couldn't find him. And so then he somehow found out about drone deer recovery and he's like, I gotta have you come out and look. And I think that was 30 hours or 26 hours after the original shot. And so I came out, flew the drone for like 5 minutes and ended up finding the carcass for him. So that one was the coolest, just with how everything went down. And the buck looked cool. It was the biggest buck he's ever shot. It wasn't a monster, but just like being able to be a part of that story and finding that buck for that hunter just meant a lot.
Yeah. You've kind of covered a lot of ground with the questions. Obviously, you're the expert on this. I have very limited knowledge of, both the technology and, the case uses and how all the different aspects that's involved with, drone deer recovery and the services you provide. So what else is there to ask, I guess, is my next question.
I would say you basically hit it. The biggest question that always people have is how long after can I call you? And until I actually have more data and because temperature has a lot to do with it, right? If you're in 70-degree temperatures, that thermal is going to stay there a lot longer because if it's hot out, let's say it's hot out today, but then tonight when the sun sets, we get a lot of temperature change there. So that carcass will still hold heat longer than the ground will. So if you start looking at it from that standpoint, that if you live in an area that has warm days and then it cools off at night, you might be able to find that carcass days later. If it's close by. Other things we do that people had us come out for is lost dogs. Lost dogs, cattle getting out. Basically anything that has a thermal, or should have a thermal, right? If it has a heartbeat, we should be able to find if it's in the area.
Yeah, that's really cool. Something that I hadn't thought of. Definitely really interesting out there for anybody who has hunting dogs or just pets in general.
Yeah.
So that's a really cool case use that I hadn't thought of.
Yeah.
You said you found dogs and cattle. Has there been anything else that you've done there?
I've been called to go look for a kangaroo, but didn't go.
Didn't find the kangaroo?
Oh, didn't go. It was in Indiana, so I would have liked to try. Something that everybody, like, there's people that ask us, like, acreage wise for doing herd analysis. There's really no acreage too big for us, because with how many operators we have, I can pull all those resources in to do big acreage. Anything over 1,000 acres to do with one drone is not, you can probably do it, but it's just not really ideal. So when people call us with 5, 10, 30,000 acres, we're able to handle that because we have all these resources to, do big acreage. And you want to try to do all the acreage at once, because if you start doing it in days, things move around, and then your count, according to me, is not as accurate as it could be if you're doing it all in day.
And even if you weren't, say, obviously it sounds like you can cover all of that ground in a day's time, but say you don't, are you then able to extrapolate the data to give them a general number on the greater acreages, or is that not even necessary?
I guess I've never gotten that detailed on taking some of the data that we've gotten and trying to figure out a multiplication or whatever to figure out what that number looks like.
Per that service, getting the herd counts, what are some things that you've learned? Because are you doing most of these herd analysis after deer season? Obviously, probably.
Yeah. Right now we are, yeah.
So during the off season, you're doing that in any time. I'm asking any time from, say, January, February, all the way up into summer. Is that correct?
Yep. So preferably we want to do it. We're in Ohio. We would start like last of October up to mid-May here, by the time the leaves come out, because to do a count when the canopies are completely full, I can't, confidently tell you that I counted all the deer, because there's just too many other places that they can hide. Ideally, you want the leaves to be off when you do that count.
Sure. So my question is, obviously it's wintertime. So this is basically a question that maybe the hunters can learn something from. Obviously they're not using the drones to find deer. You've already talked about that. But what have you learned about deer through your use of drones? So, like, as far as their behavior, the places they like to frequent or inhabit. So what have you learned just through your observations?
Yeah, so I'm trying to remember some of that stuff, like where they're laying and stuff, but I can't say that I really recall if something was odd where they were laying or where they're hanging out. But something that I've noticed that is really odd, and I'll put a video up on TikTok or maybe on this video here. Dude, I have found deer laying completely flat, like head down, like they'd be dead. They're just chilling, taking a good old snooze, legs out, sleeping. I never knew they do that. But I also never knew that a deer kind of lays like a dog sometimes, with its legs straight out in front of it, just chilling there. So some of those little things I've seen, I'm like, what the world? I had no idea they do that.
One other question: what does it cost for someone to come out and do the herd analysis?
Oh, the herd analysis, it's hard to give you a price based on acreage on a question like that. So the best way to do it is just get in touch with us. There is also a form on our website to do a herd analysis. Just fill that out, how many acres you got and stuff, and then I'll get in touch with you. It'll depend on, are we looking through a bunch of cedar trees, pine trees? Is it more ag? Is it timber? That type of thing. And I'll try to get you a price. So it's based on time and terrain that we're looking through.
Yeah. So this is a very interesting concept in all of its case uses that you mentioned. How long have you guys been in operation?
So I went public with drone deer recovery on October 1st of last year, which would have been 2022. I did research the year before, used smaller drones and tried figuring out the legal side of things, that type of thing. But literally just last October 2022 is when I went public with it.
Very cool. And obviously, you're hoping that's going to be the case for a long time to come. So, you know, it's very an interesting concept to me. It seems like it's a very effective way to recover downed game, you know, and so I think, you know, it's definitely interesting. You know, wherever it's legal, obviously, you know, it seems like a viable way to recover a dead deer. So I think that's interesting.
Yeah, thank you. It's pretty wild when you see it in person, right? Like you guys watch it on YouTube and stuff, and it's cool. I try to do my best to show you how it's done, but when you see it in person, it's like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. Like we just did one for Todd Graff out in Illinois, and he's like, this is nuts. Like you can literally see exactly how many points the deer has and stuff at 400 feet. It's crazy. It literally feels like it's the start from when trail cams and like cell cams came out. You know, that's just that whole new technology. That's how this feels. It's just another step in technology in the hunting space that just hasn't been seen yet and done.
Cool. I appreciate your time today.
Hey, I appreciate you reaching out to us. Okay, so I don't know how this video is gonna turn out, but if you guys liked it, give it a thumbs up. I appreciate the support that you guys have given us here at Drone Deer Recovery. We're on to the next one.